It's time. Congrats to all of you who are back with us. You did it. You're on time, and we appreciate you. Ooh, echo. Hello. So we're going to go into this wonderful panel, and before we start, I just want to introduce my wonderful colleague, Madison Bowles, who many of you know, but she was key to designing this entire conference over those 9 months we talked about. She was key to suggesting this topic because she has served as a subject matter expert for our team on a larger agency initiative around this work. And she also did double duty this spring because she had to plan and execute another workshop of her own for the contingent that is out in the Pacific. So she came back from that, and we put her right to work doing this, and she's been working with the panelists, and we think this is going to be a great session. It's my pleasure to introduce my colleague, Madison.
Thank you so much, Terry. Welcome back from lunch, everybody. I'm happy to be the second Madison you hear from today, which is very rare on my part. But yes, promoting access, diversity, equity, and inclusion has been a super hot topic. It's already been mentioned here today in Madison's presentation on the Planet Word event. And we've seen so many webinars, meetings, conference panels about this. And there have been varying levels of feedback and support at the state level. We realize that everyone is receiving the initiative around DEIA very differently according to where they live and how their state is handling diversity, equity, inclusion. So with that in mind, I am really thrilled to have panelists from the states here to provide their perspective on what's going on at the state library agency level. First, we have Hadia Cleveland, who's from Pennsylvania. She is joining us virtually. Then we have Jamie Ball from Arizona, Tammy Lee from Minnesota, and Romanita Lopez from Puerto Rico. So first, I will hand it over to Hadia. Do we have Hadia on? Great. There she is. Welcome, Hadia. You can go ahead and get started, and when you want me to advance your slides, I will go ahead and do that for you.
Okie. Mic check, mic check. Do you hear me out in the world? Yes, no, maybe so?
We can hear you, yes.
Okay, good, thank you. Okay, so hello everyone, and you know, what experience we've had, right? All right, so my name is Hadia Cleveland. I am coming from the state of Pennsylvania, the Pennsylvania Department of Education, Office of Commonwealth Libraries. For those of you, when these PowerPoints are posted, my PowerPoint has a lot of hyperlinks to it. So I'm not going to go into a lot of excruciating detail, but the links have it all for you so you can peruse at your leisure. Next slide, please. All right, so I'm going to start this off. So when we were having this conversation, there were a lot of acronyms thrown around, and there were also, as Madison said, varying viewpoints of reaching diverse communities. And one of the first things that I do want to point out is that words do matter. When we talk about white supremacist culture, we have to understand that there is a whole internal process that is built into maintaining and elevating white culture. And apologies if this is a little bit jarring for you, but I'm going to call it and name it what it is. Because until we're able to do that, we can't move forward. So we have to understand that the people that we are trying to serve have these feelings. And we have to recognize that, and we have to sit in that. So one of the things that we've been doing in Pennsylvania is really concentrating on language, listening to the people that don't feel afraid to speak up or want to be included. So therefore helping us learn and understand the nuances of the diversity within Pennsylvania. embarking on this work in Pennsylvania, I have definitely learned that we have representation from East Coast to West Coast, from Northern United States to Southern United States, and even the territories. We have representation from all over. So one of the things that I do want folks to keep in mind is that saying, oh, we don't see that in our community or we get a lot of pushback is no longer an option. In order to reach the diverse community, whether it is one person of color in a particular town or a group of BIPOC or Black, Indigenous people of color in a town, those folks matter. And when you collectively say that, oh, we don't have fill in the blank in our area, you're excluding those people who need services, and everyone should have access to library services. So I'm not going to read some of the examples on the screen. You can see them. They're also on the PowerPoint. But one of the biggest thing that I want to highlight for Words Matter and the work that we've been doing in Pennsylvania is the Don't Be Afraid to column. So the biggest thing is don't be afraid to learn, right? We don't know everything. We have to understand that our lived experience is not the same as someone else. And even though we may think we know, we don't always know, and that's okay. Another thing is ask questions. Typically, when you are trying to build services, when you're trying to meet people where they are, and you don't know, you have to ask questions. Let people represent themselves. Let them tell you what it is that they need. And then you can take it back, analyze it, and see within the state how you can best fit their need. And if you can't, that's reason for further communication. We had a lot of communication in Pennsylvania. A lot of the questions that we asked during the evaluation out to the field actually made it into our 5-year plan, because within Department of Education and within just this area, we have really made a concentrated effort, because what we've learned is that when the least serviced person has equitable access, that elevates the whole entire community. But we can't get there if we don't know what they need, right? So ask questions. The biggest thing in white supremacist culture is that when folks start to see changes, and we've seen this absolutely in the news, I'm sure you folks have probably on one form or another experienced this. However, folks may feel that something is being taken away from them. And that is a strong misconception. But until you understand that nuance, you can't really start to move forward. So this big thing about don't be afraid to expect and accept discomfort. Some folks are going to have discomfort from beginning to end until there's this aha moment. It might be from their grandchild. It might be from their spouse. It might be from a stranger on the street. You never know. But until they go through that journey, whatever their journey is, they're going to have that discomfort. And that's okay. There is nothing wrong with discomfort. The problem is when folks act negatively on that discomfort. And that means us in this room, our representatives from the states that are building library programs, the folks that are in the individual libraries or administering these programs, and so on and so forth. So when you're looking at that, just know and be created to be muscle memory. Teach it, do programming when you're doing your professional development. Let folks know that it is okay to you gotta expect it. You're going to feel that innate fight or flight to where you feel like something is being taken away from you. And I'm speaking directly to those who benefit from white supremacist culture. You will get that, and that's okay, and that's relevant, but don't sit in it, right? So accept it. Dissect it, ask yourself maybe why do I feel like something is being taken away from me? Find some focus groups, find some like-minded people to kind of that want to do better and want to move forward and work through those things. Because in a community, when you have that community, you're able to move past these things. I put offer your pronouns in there. There are lots of things that some folks take for granted that absolutely mean the world to others. I'll give you an example. When I started learning more about just really taking small or non-threatening steps and engaging in this work, there was a huge conversation about pronouns, and there were nuances about, like how people identify and things like that. I just took the step of putting my pronouns on my email signature. No big, not hurting anyone, I didn't make a big deal about it. I just put she, her at the end of my name. And I put a link to the pronouns, testing, 1, 2, 3. Can you hear me?
We can hear you, Hadia.
All right, I heard they said there was a bit of,
it's going, you're okay for the most part. Try turning off your video,
okay.
And maybe your internet connection.
Okie dokie, we'll try that. Okay, so with my pronouns, I put a link to, there is a website that explains the importance of offering your pronouns. So it's about maybe, yes, if you're not allowed to use pronouns, then that's a larger conversation, which I'm going to talk about, I think, in my next couple of slides on what states should be doing on a state level to embrace equity and embrace inclusion, because how can you talk about this if you're not going to be about it, as one of my friends says. So I put that link in there. Not even a month after that link, I had gotten a request for just examples of successful LSTA programs that had gotten awarded within the state. And it was from a local LGBTQIA plus organization. And when he sent me the request, it was just, hey, I'm trying to figure this out. I want to see, we're looking at planning, maybe applying for an open grant, X, Y, and Z. I replied with the information, gave him, what to do and things. When he replied back, his pronouns were on there. And actually, I'm mispronouncing. He actually put they. So all of a sudden in his signature block, their pronouns were on there. So it's those little things that make people feel included. And you never know how you're going to have an effect on someone. With these types of things. No harm, no foul. I am in a state to where they are really trying to focus on human-centeredness and really putting that equitable practice in. So for those of you who, do have those roadblocks, sounds like there's a lot of work to be done. Which leads to my last point. Do not be afraid to speak up. Folks don't know unless they hear it. You're not going to know unless you hear it from the people that you're there to serve. We can't change. We can't have constructive conversations if folks are not able or not willing to speak up. Next slide. All right. So our approach in Pennsylvania is threefold. What you'll see is that there's 3 different things here on the slide, but they're listed as first for each one because they all have to happen simultaneously or somewhat on some level. The first thing is an agreed upon mission. So in Pennsylvania, the Office of Commonwealth Libraries is under the Department of Education. We have been doing a lot of work to, one, have PDE know that libraries are part of this. We're not K through 12. We service birth to earth. So if you're talking about these equitable practices, if you're communicating out into the field the different things that we have going on, if you only target K through 12, you're excluding a large part of the population that PDE is tasked with serving. So that agreed upon mission is a very real thing. The folks that the decision makers need to be at the table. Everyone needs to agree on at least that basic purpose. So with the conversations we've been having here is that now with communication that goes out, and trust me, there are some that are more reluctant than others, but when communication goes out, they stop saying students and they started saying learners. Because learners cover from birth to earth. Libraries are not in the K-12 realm. We service way more than that. And that was a huge win. Because now when we do have conversations or when the Department of Education does put something out, libraries know that they are being called in, that they're being included in this work, and they can utilize the resources that PDE provides. The next thing is that continuous engagement, internally and externally. I cannot force this enough. It's not just about surveys. It's not just about data collection. It is about human to human interaction. It is about having those conversations. When folks feel comfortable speaking up and representing themselves, that makes a world of difference. And it takes for us as decision makers to be humble. When we go into these conversations, it's not here, let me tell you what you need. It's no, here, let me listen to you. Help me help you. So again, they're all level. That internal and external conversation has to be there. Because when we have those conversations, it may have an effect on what our mission was. Like we have a good faith effort in the beginning, but as we learn and what we learn from the conversations that we have, whether it's surveys and whether it's data and all of the above, we have to be able to meet that need or work towards meeting that need. The end result is equitable access, right? So whatever that looks like for the area in our state, it's equitable. And that also has an effect on the continuous engagement internally and externally, and also feeds from our mission. So all of these pieces feed together, but if you miss one, you have a handicap, because it's a full circle, it's a continuous circle. It is not, you can't have one without the other. Next slide, please. So this is some of the internal work that PDE has been doing. They created an EIB, Equity, Inclusion, and Belonging in the Neighborhood. So what they started out with is they got a whole lot of focus groups together, like intermediate units, superintendents, community members, representation from all throughout PDE, the different areas that the Department of Education covers. And they came up with an authentic why. Okay, that was the first step. They wanted to, or like their mission, AKA their mission, that was the authentic why. All right, and then from that authentic why, they engaged more vested partners. So hey, that's another terminology. We actually are moving away from stakeholders and calling them vested partners, because there's some negative connotation that we've learned with stakeholders. But vested partners are people that are engaged in this work. They have a vested interest in this work and they want it to succeed. And so that's what some of the terminology that we changed to call people in. So there were multiple meetings and work groups to come up with a logic model. After that internal group came up with a logic model, it was presented to all what we call P groups. So P groups are like our Pennsylvania School Association, our Pennsylvania Library Association, or the Pennsylvania Association for Teachers, like all of our P groups, because Pennsylvania starts with P. So all of those professional organizations, all of those folks that would be directly affected by this work, we presented it to them. We needed to get their buy-in, because we can create all this work, but the folks who are actually administering programs and administering projects, if they're not bought in, it's going to fall. So we presented to P groups. And then the next thing, what we were doing is we were seeking out like promising practices. And that's actually kind of what we're still going through right now, is analyzing what those promising practices are. So these are talking to people in the field. These are like, hey, folks, we know you've been doing work. Can you give us examples of what you've already been doing so that we can then elevate your voice to show other folks that may be in your similar situation how you can embed this work and maybe not make it threatening. And then we also we plan to release an actual roadmap. So it's basically a strategic plan. We're calling it a roadmap. But you know, it just kind of like gives those examples of ways that this work can be embedded, not at the decision maker level, but at the secretary level, at the janitor level, at the all folks, just all folks, from, I don't want to say top to bottom, but I also, you know, everyone involved. All right, so I need to pick it up. So with that, what you can see is in that EIB in the neighborhood, there are multiple houses within PDE. And so this is how we incorporate everyone within PDE. We task them with this work, and then each one has their charge to go through and implement this. Next slide, please. So this is the Office of Commonwealth Libraries house. So if you look at the house, each of the gray and white levels are like the floors. So we're tasked with looking at what we can do on a state level, what we can do within Commonwealth Libraries, and also what can we do at a local library level. And so this is kind of like our snapshot, and we look at, like, you know, where to begin, think about roadblocks, what can we recommend to others, what can we elevate that meets our logic model and the strategic plan. Next slide, please. All right, so I'm still on internal work. So what we did within the Office of Commonwealth Libraries is we took some of the 5 main practices that came, or levels that came out of that greater Department of Education work. And what we started doing is populating within those categories what we're currently doing that already meets those categories. So that's what this is. Like I said, there are hyperlinks to all of this, so you can see what's going on here. We are really excited about the Video Games Club of America. They're based here in Pennsylvania. It is a rock star program. I really encourage you all to click on that, view them, view their work. And it's Games Club of America, so if you're interested in duplicating our program, check us out because it is wonderful. It brings in all of the misfits from school, and they collectively get together and do social emotional practices through gaming. Absolutely phenomenal. Next slide, please. These are the other 3 areas of the PDE higher buckets that we brainstorm to see what we're already doing. And so one of the things that I do want to point out is that one of the categories was equitable and inclusive policies and decisions. And we included our GAC in there because with that, when we start talking about equitable policies, it goes to that level. And so we're starting to engage with our GAC to make sure that this work that we're doing is not just on a surface level, that it goes all the way through. Next slide, please. Okay. Also within the Office of Commonwealth Libraries, whenever a library development advisor wants to embark on a new project, they have to submit a project charter. And what I've implemented within the project charter is SMART T goals instead of just SMART goals. And what we're doing, this is embedding this, reaching diverse populations, is it starts with planning. Right? So we've included that folks have to look at and think about what is the inclusive aspect of their goals? What's the equitable aspect of their goals? Because one of the things is that if you're used to going to the same presenters, you're not going to go anywhere. you're going to continue to perpetuate into this white supremacist culture. There are GUGADs of presenters and content experts that are not white, are not Caucasian, and we need to elevate the diversity of the field in order for all of us to be better. And once we do that, when folks start to see themselves in these programs, there's higher attendance, we address that equity piece, we can start serving our populations in a more holistic way. I mean, like the results are just like tenfold. They just keep coming. Next slide, please. All right. This is a highlight of Teen Reading Lounge. The reason why I put this on here, and I do believe I have a link. I'm going to put a link in the chat, but if you want to view more, you can click on the link. So the reason why I put this particular library on here, this is Sayre Public Library. They are in the reddest part of Pennsylvania. I can't even begin to explain how the struggles that the library has encountered with trying to implement diversity programs and practices within their community. However, the library director and then the library board is actually committed to this work. And so because of this, they're able to do these programs. So that's why I say, for those folks in the middle of the state that feel like they're fighting a lot of backlash, there is a way to do this. It's all about communication and it is all about learning. I think I am close to being done, so I will be wrapping this up soon. Please click on the links. Can you go to the next slide, please? Including You is another project that I just wanted to highlight. This focuses directly on library staff or library volunteers. And what it does is it helps people go through those difficult conversations. It focuses on microaggressions, how to address them, acting as a bystander. We use a niche academy for tutorials for people to do practice. We utilize accountability partners to help people work through, go through this work. And the biggest part is embedding it at a local level. When there's a community of practice with this, it cannot go away. And folks will either reluctantly sign on or just not make such a big fuss. But it takes for us to be able to have that thick skin, have that strong backbone, be committed to this work, and you are absolutely able to meet the needs of your community. And with that, there's other slides that you can look at. It just goes into in detail about Including You. My contact information is on here, but I am wrapping up so I can give other folks their time. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Hadia, and thank you for continuing to present, even though you're virtual. We appreciate it. Before I hand it over to Jamie, I first want to say something that I forgot to say at the beginning. For those who are attending virtually, if you feel comfortable sharing things that are going on in your state or issues that you're having in your state around this topic, feel free to put that in the chat, and we will try to read them out at the end of the session. So with that, take it away, Jamie.
Okay, can you hear me okay? Hi, everybody. So good to see you. Actually, it's probably better if I wasn't here and our tribal library consultant, Mary Vegas, was here, but you have to make do with me. I copied a lot of her stuff off of the SPR, and that's the best I can do. The main thing that she always likes to say is that we are in a sovereign-to-sovereign relationship with our tribal libraries. There are 22 recognized tribes in Arizona and 18 systems, library systems, and each tribe and library is unique. And Mary always emphasizes the importance of developing relationships over time, becoming knowledgeable about tribal governments and history, and appreciating that there are sometimes those trust issues between the tribal and state governments. So I'm going to just read the first paragraph here of this next slide. When working with tribal communities, patience, persistence, and the ability to respect the unique cultures and workflows is necessary when serving tribal libraries. Different types of approaches to communication is important, and be prepared to go face-to-face as much as possible. So with that little bit of background, I just want to talk about 4 ways that the State Library, Arizona State Library, works with tribal library staff to provide LSTA-funded resources to their communities. That's subgrants, digital inclusion projects, database training, and books for tribal libraries. So the subgrants, tribal libraries compete like any other library in the state for subgrants. But I did notice that the tribal libraries really jumped on the Wi-Fi hotspot lending. This is a picture of a student at the Ak-Chin Indian community with a circulating hotspot. The library partnered with their Department of Ed to identify college students who do not have the internet at home and provided these circulating hotspots. Digital inclusion projects are spearheaded by our departing digital inclusion library consultant. Her last day is tomorrow. But in 2017, 18, and 19, she held tribal library digital inclusion summits, which focused on a variety of topics such as defining digital inclusion needs, language, digitizing and archiving language materials, media literacy, distributing digital literacy kits, and so forth. She also collaborated with the Hopi tribal librarian on a digitization week, collaborated on some programming, got some people in to do some oral histories. And she also, how can I put it, brought in an intern from the University of Arizona Knowledge River program to start doing some tech assessments with tribal libraries. Database training, you all know what database training is. I just want to point out that Mary Villegas dug into Ancestry and found a bunch of Bureau of Indian Affairs documents that were really useful to people trying to trace their family histories. And then finally, books for tribal libraries. We've been doing this for probably decades now. Very basic situation there. The only thing I wanted to point out was that we're starting to offer ebooks this year, and Ak-Chin, the library I mentioned earlier, is no longer providing or purchasing print books for adults. They're only purchasing ebooks for adults and print books for children. So, and then I had the nerve to say questions. I don't have any answers, but you can always email me, and I can tell Mary if you have a question.
Do I just advance?
The green one.
This one? Mm-hmm. The big one?
Yep.
Oh,
there you
yay. Are. Hi, my name is Tammy Lee, and I'm the Director of State Library Services and Expanded Learning for the Minnesota Department of Education. So our state library is located under MDE. And I just want to start off with I've only been in the position since October, and the things that I'm kind of like you, Jamie. The things that I'm talking about were started. All of these initiatives were started before I arrived, but I'm fully on board. So, since I've been in the position, I've definitely done a lot of work around these initiatives as well. All right, and so as a person under the umbrella of MDE, I need to let you know that MDE and State Library Services is committed to equity, and the things that I'm going to talk about today especially emphasize things like prioritizing equity, starting from within, measuring what matters, starting early, monitoring the implementation of standards, and valuing people. I mean, really all of these, but those are the things that stand out in the initiatives that I'm going to talk about. I also want to specifically mention that in our IMLS plan that is current, Jen Nelson, who is the State Library Director for New Jersey, did a wonderful and brave thing, because at the time, 2018, I think is when that was, not a lot of states were putting initiatives for equity and diversity and inclusion in their plans, and she did. And then her great staff, before our current staff, got started on this work and felt comfortable with doing this work. And so yeah, that is one thing that I'm very thankful in inheriting this position in this work. So. Equity needs Minnesota. Minnesota needs equity. Gosh, I can't see what's written down and what's over there. I forgot to bring my five-foot notes. But basically, people of color in Minnesota, and I'll say people of color and indigenous people. Well, people of color in Minnesota make up about 19% of the population. We have 1% of our population is indigenous. And that's been steadily growing. Basically, Minnesota is kind of catching up with the rest of the states, and we're doing it very quickly. Between 2010 and 2015, the state added 4 times as many people of color as white folks. So we really are working on it. This trend will continue at a significant pace given current birth trends. For instance, in 2015, 96% of Minnesotans 85 years and older identified as white, compared to 69% of children that don't identify as white under 5. So it's growing really fast, and we'll continue to attract many immigrant communities. We already have a lovely, healthy Somali, Hmong, Karen. We have Afghan refugees that are coming into the state. So it is a lovely, lovely thing. And these are just, I can't remember the graphs I put on there. Yes, okay, yes, just some general growth in Minnesota. One thing when we're talking about libraries, State Library Services does have a current project called Minnesota Library Leads, and so about a year ago we were able to do a survey of 330 Minnesota librarians, and of course it's data that we can't really take formal conclusions from, but about 7% of our library staff population that responded as being non-white in this. So I don't know, I'm really curious actually to find out exactly, what exactly that number might be, but I think it's probably about right for librarians of color in Minnesota. And also, last but not least for this slide, is we all know that representation matters. It's really important for all people to see themselves reflected in all forms of libraries and work. It is almost as important, just right up there, for dominant culture to know that they're not the only ones that can be featured in the book, that can solve the mystery, that can lead the pack, that sort of thing. So when we are faced with people saying, oh, well, a lot of Minnesota would say we're not diverse, because I never see anybody down at the Cub Foods that, doesn't look like me, or in church, that sort of thing. But that's why we do EDI work, is that and in communities that don't seem as diverse as others, because it is really important for that message to get out as well. All right, so I'm just going to talk about some background, and then I'm going to talk about the real exciting, well, for me, real exciting part, hopefully for you too, of things that we're working on. It's important for us to, obviously, to have our racial equity and our EDI, or equity, diversity, and inclusion goals align with not only MDE, or the Minnesota Department of Education, but with the IMLS. And so I thought that I would just kind of highlight some of the alignments in our current, which you could go and look at if you'd like, our current IMLS plan. some of the activities that we're doing around them already. So a couple of things that, actually Hadia mentioned this as well, maybe you're familiar with it, is Project Ready, which is reimagining equity and access for diverse youth. And I'm only going to highlight a few because there's a ton. But the ones that I liked the best, no, I shouldn't say that. The ones that I'm impressed with, along with others. Another initiative that we did in State Library Services is, I don't know if anybody's heard of them, it's We Are out of North Carolina, and they do anti-racism literacy-based education in a summer camp format. And so we had them come to Minnesota and train us how to do something similar in libraries, again, because it was literacy-based, and that went over really well. GARE, or Government Alliance on Race and Equity, racial equity listening sessions, workshops like All Are Welcome, the role of libraries in advancing racial equity. We are working on developing in-state equity cohorts, and of course, one of our biggest projects that we will keep expanding as much as possible is the Indigenous representations projects that we have going on that are similar to the things that Jamie is doing in Arizona. Those are all, again, just a small sample of the things that we're doing. I think one thing that I would like for this to illustrate is that so like I had said, Jen Nelson had put an equity initiative in the IMLS plan. One thing as we're working on our new IMLS plan, and Hadia also mentioned this, is to make sure that it is baked into every single aspect, to leave room to make sure that we can do these initiatives in everything that we do. It is so important. It can't be just like, oh, today is Tuesday, we're working on equity. Equity is everywhere. And sometimes when people don't understand that, I like to illustrate, as a Black woman, equity is in everything that I do. It is when I go to the pharmacy or the doctor, or when I go and talk to the principal at my kid's school. It is in the looks I get when I go to the Y, or, I mean, it's in every single thing. And so it needs to be in every single thing for all of us to make sure that we're doing that work. All right. So the process, thank you, Madison, for the prompts, because I was like, but how we got here. So it is a great State Library Services team, and the people that really started this before I got there are Hannah Buckland, Leah Larson, Verena Gatehoon, Ashley Bieber, Catherine Duravage, I'm forgetting somebody, and Cassie Leaport. Really wonderful, brave work. So basically, a couple of staff went off to some sort of training and came back really excited to do some more meaningful work that was a little bit beyond holding workshops for library staff around the state, that sort of thing, and really wanted to do some of that hard work of forming a group and doing something that was meaningful and equitable. So they went off to this workshop. They brought it back to the team. The team started self-reflection. I was looking at notes from the time because they kept really good notes. And I mean, sometimes I was like, just the things that they were addressing within themselves. Always a good start when you're doing any sort of equity work. The level of self-reflection in those notes and in those discussions was amazing, and it was just lovely, hard work, and including things like accepting discomfort and also making sure that when you're working towards equity, that you're being equitable, because sometimes that doesn't happen. Sometimes it's very top-down. Oh, we've decided that this needs to be this way, and then sometimes you lose that equity aspect. So in summer of 2020, State Library Services held a series of listening sessions on library workers' experiences with racial equity initiatives, which actually I thought was a great question. Instead of like, hey, what do you think of racial equity? Like, hey, what do you think of what we've done so far? Like, we haven't, had you involved, and we've just decided these things. And they got some surprising responses, and some responses that helped motivate them towards this project. In the fall of, so they discussed it some more. They discussed it with the people that they were interviewing. And, I'll say this. I am using the word BIPOC because the group chose that. I know that not everyone is comfortable with BIPOC, but it basically stands for Black, Indigenous, People of Color when you're referring to them as a group, and that's the word that the group chose for themselves. But in the fall of 2020, the State Library Services staff proposed a plan for building this BIPOC advisory group based on what they were finding out in listening sessions. So then soon after, they put out a call, basically. There wasn't a great response initially. I think that sometimes when you're doing this sort of work, Black and Brown and Indigenous folks are afraid. If you're already in a tenuous position, and often if you're the only one in your system, if you are the only one at your branch, if you don't have a lot of access to other people in the same field, sometimes it can be nerve-wracking. Sometimes people just aren't built to do that sort of thing. And so the response wasn't huge, and so they started sending out, like, hey, would you please? And they got together a group of 11 people and then specifically asked another person who's a little bit more outstate that maybe had been thinking about it to make sure that they had Indigenous representation in the group. And so they formed the first group of 12 BIPOC advisory members. It is a paid position as far as there is a stipend for being an advisory member, and they all got together and determined how to work together to start. So that was kind of one of the biggest tasks because we're a team that is getting paid to do this work, not to mention want to do it, and then here we have this advisory group. They're all kind of a little wary of each other. What is this? What's going on? And that took a while to do. It took a while to create that foundation. The things that they were thinking about, especially at the beginning, were people being afraid to make mistakes when doing equity work. How to approach library leaders around the state with the importance and how to explain the goals of this work. Clarifying conversations about how this should be deployed and who does what and that sort of thing. So those were the things that they were talking about in the beginning. One of the major lessons learned was the stepping back and co-creating with the BIPOC advisory group. Again, we always want to have a leader, and somebody's got to take the notes, somebody's got to schedule the meetings and that sort of thing, and all of the practical aspects of being a part of a group like this. But one thing that kept coming up is the co-creation aspect of it. For dominant culture majority staff, finding or navigating that was interesting, and so they were able to do it. One thing that I found in a note was nothing about us without us, being kind of the message from the BIPOC advisory group. And still, we're still growing and learning. One thing that SLS staff came up with was planning something that was requested by the advisory group, which was BIPOC Summit, and that's what I'm going to talk about now. But still, the purpose and mission and goals of the group are pretty clear, but they're still in formation. So the advisory group and the team decided to focus on something practical, like having this summit. I'm going to skip over this because I kind of basically already talked about it. Sorry. All right, so our BIPOC advisory summer happened in May of this last May, Friday the 13th, and still went off really well. And really the purpose was to bring BIPOC library staff and library professionals from around the state. We had 82 people register. We had 63 people there consistently for the whole day, and 73 people in and out. And we had about 32 surveys that came out. It was a lovely day. We had a great MC in Shardabs who has a background of self-care and wove that in throughout the day-long event. We had the keynote speaker was, hopefully you all know her, and if you don't, then go look her up and read her stuff. Fubatsi Attar came and talked about deconstructing vocational awe, which is a wonderful term. And Jessica Bratt, who actually was also wonderful and very, she just spoke powerfully to the group, and Dr. Lorene Roy talked about tools for survival and resistance. And it was just a great day. Constant comments of it's so wonderful to have a safe space. I don't have to code switch in this space. We had a lot of breakout groups and sessions as well during that day, and everybody, we sent out a care package as well before the event. But it really was a great connecting event for BIPOC library staff and professionals in Minnesota. So there's more to come. This is a great group. I would encourage you all to consider doing something similar, having that resource. Even as just a BIPOC librarian myself, it was just such a lovely day and a lovely event. So that's it. Thank you so much.
Hello? As you know, my name is Ramonita Lopez. I'm from Puerto Rico Department of Education. You meet Mr. Hector Reillo too. The library, sorry. I can't believe it.
Happens to me all the time.
Happens to me all the time too.
Sorry. It's my first time in a Grand Tuesday conference, and my first time speaking. I can't believe it. Okay. The Library and Information Services Program of the Puerto Rico Department of Education provides leadership and support to Puerto Rico's libraries to assist them and satisfy the information needs of the residents by offering programs, services, and promoting the love of reading and lifelong learning, regardless of age, location, and social or physical condition. Our mission in a medullary element that aspires to create learning communities to strengthen and democratic society, to contribute to development of lifelong learners by promoting in students the use of information and ideas considering the ethical values of our society. The specific needs for the library services and identifying the 5-year plan is a result of analysis of various sources. The first one is a 5-year plan evaluation report that identified the state top needs, our achievement or partial achievement. The second one is the needs assessment survey, which took place on this May 2022. Most of the needs considered are taken from the evaluation report, and the survey Most of the needs considered are taken from the evaluation report and survey. However, there are additional sources that are taken into consideration, such as the discussion and conclusion from the stakeholders, grupos de interés in Spanish, school library coordinators, IMLS focal areas to help describe the impact of library services, telephone and personal interviews to the school community, and feedback from the site visits. During these meetings and activities, the goals and objectives of the LSTA and the result for the preliminary needs assessment survey are presented and discussed. After that needs assessment survey is complete. Finally, a special committee of Puerto Rico Department of Education employees and librarians community is created to discuss and evaluate and summarize the findings that will be addressed in the 5-year plan and meet needs of the libraries services of Puerto Rico. Our state's specific needs in the last 5-year plan. School, first one is school library must continue to help improve and enrich the academic performance of reading skills of Puerto Rico public school students. Second needs, libraries in Puerto Rico have a critical need to keep up with technology and offer virtual services for users. Third needs is improved learning and access information and educational update, resources in a variety of formats and databases. Or most residents of Puerto Rico do not possess technological skills or not have access to technological resources that would enable them to have access to reliable information. A high percentage of citizens need to be aware of library services available in their community, especially individuals with disabilities and senior citizens. There is a need to enhance the skills of library staff in all types of libraries, increase their leadership skills, and advance the delivery of library services. Our goals, goal 1, virtual library services to provide virtual library services to residents of Puerto Rico in a variety of formats and databases. Goal 2, provide support and improve and expand library program and services to especially to senior citizens and individual with disabilities. Goal 3, provide training and professional development for librarians and librarian teachers. I'm sorry. We developed special projects in goal 1. We have Tatum digital platforms. This platform, this project is taking the library to home, llevando la biblioteca a tu hogar. This is a virtual literary gamified digital platform with interactive Spanish books for elementary through high school. This is the screen of the Tatum platform. In this slide, you can see the teacher, the library teacher, sorry. She dressed, this is for Sidra, Puerto Rico. And this teacher, library teacher, dressed her to a character story to keep emotion in the students during the reading time. In these slides, you can see a goal to a special project. This is a library teacher in Angelita School, Lares, Puerto Rico. This teacher ensuring approach access for individuals with disabilities, in this case, child with autism. She creates a special spot in the library for this student to approach these students. This slide is a goal to special project. This is a specialized school in Humacao, Puerto Rico. This school library awarded acquisition of special equipment to approach a special student, in this case, blind students. She acquisition a Braille typewriter to this student and an interactive screen, smart interactive screen. I'm sorry. Okay. I think the lesson we are to learning during this situation of pandemic, I think the virtual education was asking to be considered as an option. Puerto Rico in the recent years has suffered some natural disaster like Hurricane Maria, earthquakes, and the pandemic. I think the students be prepared to remotely education. I think this generation is a virtual generation. I think that maybe parents and teachers don't be prepared to this virtual situation during this pandemic. But our sons, they are be prepared because they are more media, social media. They are in Instagram, TikTok, Snapchat. I think they are prepared to learning, virtual learning or remotely learning. We must continue to essential and use new learning technologies to approach all audiences. Librarian teachers from Puerto Rico during this pandemic play an important role in this pandemic situation because we collaborate with teachers of basic subjects to achieve learning goals. Thank you. I'm so glad to be here. I love this program so much.
Thank you so much to you four ladies, people for presenting on what's going on in your state. I know we're a little bit over time, and Dennis and I already talked about bleeding into his time. I do want to briefly go over some things that are happening at IMLS. We are very much on this very journey in figuring out how DEIA fits into our own responsibilities and needs. And there's many layers to this. We have us as a federal agency, us as a grant-making institution, and also us as a workplace. So I just wanted to share very quickly a few things. As part of a federal agency, there has been multiple executive orders that have come through. The first of which came out, I believe, late last year, which was a government-wide issue on really incorporating more DEI work into the workforce. And with that, they had some standardized definitions that were to apply to across the entire U.S. government. I'm not going to read them for time's sake, but you can refer to them there. And from that, it prompted IMLS to develop an internal equity assessment, which took place in the summer and fall of last year. Essentially, we hosted interviews with each of our offices internally just to better understand staff perceptions of equity barriers within both our internal operations and grant-making activities. The exercise provided a lot of really valuable information, and we found that staff were very forthcoming with their insights, which was very helpful. And we had three main takeaways here. And this was really to find out, like, what could we do better? Where could we do better? We found that IMLS has limited capacity to really conduct outreach and technical assistance. And the more we could perfect that and the more that we could get more involved with that, the better we could reach our constituents with better value. We also found there was a need to collect better data around our own equity efforts and who we aren't reaching and who maybe is not applying for our grants or who cannot apply for our grants and why. What about our grant-making processes is really setting up barriers in and of themselves that keeps folks from receiving our funds. And the final high-level finding was to see a need in populations represented within organizational structures that we serve in libraries and museums. So making sure that the folks that we see out in public and the folks that we serve in libraries and museums also reflect that in our own workforce. Then another executive order came out that prompted us to create an equity action plan, which is really about the work that we do externally. And this is a public-facing document. You can find it on performance.gov. And the link is on this slide. We'll provide the link in the slides you'll receive, but we have 5 high-level areas that we'll be working on in this equity action plan. Data collection for equity-based grant making, engaging with the field and technical assistance, diversifying the professions we engage with, as well as building an internal resource center, an engagement officer, and capacity building within the agency, and finding more ways we can include equity and diversity and inclusion within our contracting and grant making, contracting and procurement activities as an agency. I know all of you have read our new strategic plan. So within Goal 4 of the new plan that came out earlier this year, which is demonstrate excellence in public service, we do have a strategy, we do have some strategies and key performance goals around building a workplace culture that fosters respect and collaboration and promotes an open and transparent communication and embraces diversity, equity, and inclusion. You can read more about that if you haven't already. And finally, but definitely not least, we have an internal DEIA working group at IMLS, and this is really about what we are doing internally as a workplace. And so we are in the midst of developing a strategic plan. Our working group has written up that plan over a period of several months. It is getting approved and reviewed and approved by the Office of Personnel Management. So it's not yet public yet, but you can see our vision and mission statement for that. But that should be approved sometime shortly this year. So with that, thank you again, friends, for joining this panel today. It was super valuable and inspiring, and I know we're over time, but I think it was worth it. I'm gonna reach out quickly to our friends over monitoring the digital realm. Cindy and Laura, do we have any like brief comments that anyone has made over in the chat?
So I think chat was actually pretty quiet. I think people were absorbing a lot. I think each of the speakers can agree that we could have given each of you all day. This is a super important topic. I do have just a couple comments. One of the states indicated that they were not permitted to include their pronouns in their email signatures. New Jersey, I think I can out you. New Jersey is so lucky to have Jen Nelson here now. And there's some information that's being shared within the chat that has not been shared in the slides. So Laura and I are going to work on that together, and that will be provided after the convening. Mm-hmm. So thanks, everybody.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. And I'll hand it back over to Terry and Dennis.
All right, I'm just the talker as the movement is happening. So most of you know Dennis Nangle, a program officer like Madison Bowles. He's been with the IMLS program now through 2 5-year plan cycles, so he's got great insight on this experience. And we spent the morning talking about evaluations. We had a little reset with the topics of social well-being and reaching diverse audiences, but now we're going to come back to the 5-year plans. And just a note, of gratitude from me. Dennis does so much going into this conference. He's so high energy, has lots of creativity, and we could not have done this conference without him. So please welcome Dennis.
Thank you, Terry. Thank you, everybody. I'm really excited to be here with all of you virtually and in person. As Terry mentioned, this session is going to, that's an exercise that we didn't have time to do. That's all right. I did want to mention briefly because with all of the processing and comments and different things that may have come out of the previous session and subsequent sessions, just a plug for the parking lot over there, and I think there's maybe like a place for burning questions, or that is all the same. I'm blanking at the moment, but in the event that you have comments, they don't even have to be questions, just things you want to kind of unload and let us know about, that's a great place for that to happen. So this session, it might seem like a lot at once. We just talked about the evaluation. We're not giving you even a minute to breathe before heading into the plan. But at the same time, we're hoping that while the information is fresh from the last plan's evaluation process, that we can be thinking and helping you all think about how to have the end in mind as you kick off this plan. So that's the general thrust of this session. Is Talitha here with us virtually to cover her? Okay, great. So that's what we'll start out with Talitha, who's going to talk about, she mentioned this earlier in the morning, some learnings from the community of practice related to the 5-year plan, and then again, some of the takeaways from the evaluation process to help kind of usher us into this new 2023-2027 period. Take it away, Talitha.
Okay, hi everyone. I just got patched in, beamed in from the talking head world. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, Dennis. Let's see. Right, so we're thinking again about what we've actually, several threads of the whole conversation this morning have been repeated intentionally and sometimes not so much because, but anyway, it's an example of triangulation of the themes that are looking ahead and the lessons learned. So again, it's important to think about measurement and data collection. And you guys talked about that in the morning in your challenges. The challenges of it was hard to measure this. If thinking ahead, sometimes you can't solve all the problems, but it's helpful and you can solve many. And then again, thinking ahead about how you're going to determine those 3 IMLS reporting categories. Marrying the aspirational goals with operational goals, objectives. So it's fine to have an aspirational goal. We should all aspire. Think also about how breaking that down. So walking over one mountain instead of the whole mountain range, and measuring walking over each mountain. So speaking of mountains, you want a roadmap to get through those mountains. So your plan is the roadmap for both of you, for you and your evaluator. I talked earlier about planning to plan the evaluation in the plan. There's too many plans in there, but anyway. I just ate lunch. Maybe I'm a little, I'm 3 hours behind you folks, so anyway, so. But Dennis always makes me happy, so I want to be a little bit happy. Finally, playing the long game, remembering past and future. And with that, we'll just maybe go to the next slide and look again with what we talked about earlier, those specific ideas and strategies from the community of practice, looking through your past goals and clarifying perceptions and expectations by asking these questions about your goals. When you write them, are they measurable? Are they aspirational, operational, achievable? What does that mean? Are there too many? And then revising them. And I know the plan is almost due and already submitted for some of you, but it's still possible to keep it as a work in progress in further defining things. So plan for data collection and analysis, of course, we talked about that, and also make sure you use the information for that continuity, that evaluation, and data use culture that at least I've been talking about, but hopefully you all have as well in your conversations at tables and other presentations I've missed. And I'm always here to answer questions about some of these things. I think you all probably get it. And I guess I would like to turn it back to Dennis for the press conference.
Thank you, Talisa. So Terry mentioned our theme, and we love a theme. We can never not have a theme. But this year, the theme kind of emerged from the fact that you're reporting a lot, twice as much, so you're all reporting. It's a lot of journalism-heavy things going on. But at the same time, those reports are very critical to getting the story out and storytelling. So that's kind of the thrust of the theme. I couldn't help but plug that in there. And so we're calling this period of time where we're asking questions from you our press conference. So originally we were thinking maybe spend 15 minutes discussion. I'm going to cut it down to 8 minutes to kind of save us some time and get that back. And so, yeah, as you can see, these are just some discussion prompts. It's not like a hard black and white thing. We really just want to encourage, and we're eager to hear your perspectives of the process. And also if how the previous plan's evaluation influenced this plan, perhaps. And then thirdly, how you will measure in the new plans your goals, your focal areas, your beneficiaries. Again, this is not what you directly have to answer, but maybe something to get the conversation started. And then after we're done, we'll pass the mic around and get some thoughts. If we could wrap up our very lively discussions about the plan process, it's great to hear. Yeah, so it sounded like there was a lot to discuss with the plan process. So if anybody is willing to kind of share what they were discussing, any reflections or anything like that, we would love to hear it.
We're going to go with the virtual folks first because we're rocking it over
Great,
here.
yes, thank you,
Okay,
Cindy.
Fantastic. I'm going to not out them by state, but our folks are doing really well. A lot of them are looking at things completely differently in that they're peppering in or including the ED&I access. I need some more coffee. ED&I and A perspective. A lot of them are just happy to turn something in. I get that. No judgment whatsoever. Several of them made the comment that they were really happy that there was greater staff involvement this go around. There were a few that commented on how many staff openings there were, and that was a bit of a challenge for them as well. And again, they were really pleased with the process and their consultants. So it's pretty positive over here, Dennis.
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you, Cindy.
You're welcome.
And
You're welcome.
virtual people.
Yes, they're rocking it.
Rachel.
I'll just say flexibility became a thing. That's what the evaluation taught us. A lot of our past plan was just like separate siloed individual passion projects, and when those employees quit, they didn't happen. So we went with our overall, like, if all of us die tomorrow, unfortunately, how do we make this go? Evan's very nervous whenever I say that. We're fine, we're good. But we noticed, like, we want to make sure this is something that can make the state library keep moving forward, even if personnel changes, not dies.
Right. Right. Just a change, yes. Debbie.
Debbie Hall.
I'm going to address how did the previous plan's evaluation influence this plan. I think it reinforced that we are going in the right direction, because since we are all statewide projects, let's not talk about ARPA, that we're doing the right thing, because all of our projects are ongoing, and there was something about something that has been asked for forever, and we're working on that right now, and that will be one of the new projects in the 5-year plan. So I think it just reinforced that we're on the right track.
Great. All right. Well, I can move along and keep us on our time. Again, if any other things come up, there's a place to capture those. But I'm at this point, and I'm glad to hear those varying perspectives of the plan and your experience with them. I talked about a little bit earlier how this is a unique time, and I feel like we've been saying that for 3 years. This is a unique time. But what I mean specifically, what this is a unique time for, is the transition of putting to bed your former plan and ramping up to the new plan. So later on in this session, I'll have one of our trusty timelines to visualize what I'm talking about. But I'll dive more into the timing of this transition period. But as you think about using your new plan to guide and influence your SPR reporting, it is a unique opportunity to be aware of what your new plan is prior to receiving the grant funds that are to be spent in alignment with said plan. So we just want to take advantage. It seems like it might be an early discussion right now, but we're hoping to kind of get some ideas flowing now, because there's a chance to take a 1,000-foot view of your approach to reporting and data collection and make any desired changes, and maybe use this new 5-year plan period as almost like a reset. And even for states that plans haven't changed very much, there still might be an opportunity to change the way you report or the way you collect data. And one of the more recent SPR updates, which is the data dashboard, could serve as a way to quickly check in on the progress that you're making towards your goals throughout the plan period. That has had kind of a soft launch midway through the 2018-2022 plan period. But now that we have the dashboard for the full next 5 years, we wanted to call it out a little bit more explicitly. So this is one of the 4 dashboard elements. This is Illinois' example. I was just using a random state to kind of show how this works. And the graph features all 5 years of a given plan period. So you can see that with this one, all that we have for SPR data right now is 2020, but that will continue to be populated as as the report data is populated as well. Now, 3 out of the 4 dashboard elements offer a snapshot of your state library's spending activity under each goal. The first summarizes how the LSTA funds were spent each year, and these are categorized by goal. And the graphs respond to hovering over certain elements with your cursor. So here, I took a screenshot of me kind of hovering over one of them so you could see more immediately what goal that was and the specific numerical amount in case you needed that specific little snapshot of where you were. The other two, I call them expenditure-driven dashboard elements. They display how match funds are spent and then the total funds expended. And the color coding of the goals remains consistent across all of the graphs to help you easily make visual comparisons. And the asterisk next to each of the financial graphs indicate that the administrative costs are not included, and that's because admin funds aren't attributed to a 5-year plan goal. But that's kind of a general gist. The final element of the dashboard doesn't capture expenditures, but instead the distribution of projects across 5-year plan goals. As we all know, sometimes the cost of a project doesn't fully reflect the achievedness, is what I'm using, kind of similar to, what was that? Nimbler. So it's sometimes helpful to assess the number of projects instead of just looking at the amount of money that went toward it. And so we're kind of officially launching this now at the start of the 5-year plan period, also because the stimulus funds won't disproportionately affect this data like it did during this plan period. So we're really hoping for a clean slate with the forthcoming grant funds. And then another feature of this dashboard, which is a nice little bonus, is you can export it. So there's an option to download an Excel file of the data. So this is all, it should be showing up as soon as you log into the SPR. Before you click into your list of projects, you should see it there. And there's an orange Save State Goals data. And then it takes a minute to prepare the data, and then that orange download button should show up for you to export. And so it's not at all exhaustive. It's not every single piece, and we kind of think that that's a benefit because if you do need a bit more of a concise, quick snapshot for people who may not be super jazzed with all of the SPR detail that you may be, this could help. This can help very easily work with some top-level expenditure data, especially how it aligns with your goals. And so another item in your toolbox for making the reporting process for the next 5-year plan evaluation smoother is the crosswalk. So we've previously discussed the crosswalk in other webinars and other presentations in the conference, et cetera. And you all should be pretty aware of the crosswalk since you just submitted your plan that is required to have one. But we've been mostly talking about the crosswalk in the context of what IMLS is looking for in a complete crosswalk, basically so we don't send it back to you. But I wanted to spend some time going beyond that and talk about how the crosswalk can maybe be utilized beyond meeting a requirement and hopefully guide future SPR reporting. I think Rachel talked about kind of being not dependent on an individual. We'll say it that way, and kind of keeping things evergreen. And so that crosswalk may help to do that when a question comes up of how should I report this project in the SPR. So this is a sample crosswalk that we've used previously, as I mentioned. And then for the sake of providing a concrete example, I'll use this crosswalk in subsequent slides to demonstrate a hypothetical situation where this crosswalk is used to guide SPR reporting. I want to emphasize, though, right from the beginning, that this is not intended to come across as a rigid, prescriptive way of how to report in the SPR. There are a number of ways to work with your crosswalk. I'm just using this one as one example of doing it. And also, this is a good time to remind everybody that you are not required or committed to carrying out all of the projects listed in your 5-year plan in the SPR, because we do know that things change. So I don't want to give off the impression that this example requires you to make sure everything matches neatly with your 5-year plan. So as you can see, I took a little snapshot of that crosswalk where it talked about the associated project. And I went into our little sandbox area of the SPR to kind of do a mock-up. And I made one project in the SPR for every project that's listed in this sample crosswalk. So this, the reason why this might be helpful is it could ultimately make your next evaluation process smoother and more effective for both you and your evaluator if they can easily match up. Oh, okay, you said you were going to do this in your 5-year plan, and here's how it matches up with the SPR. This is, again, not the only way to do it, but it's an example of how this shows up in the SPR. And this is another kind of comparison. Might be a little bit difficult to see, but what I'm trying to emphasize here is on the right side is what this looks like in the SPR. And you can see how the project title and then the associated goal is all listed in the SPR project and once again matches with what this crosswalk is saying. So it's a great way to kind of cross-check the integrity of your data year after year, just to make sure that at the end of 5 years, the projects that you indicated in your 5-year plan are lining up the way that you intended them to. That didn't move, did it? Oh, because I'm using a laser. There you go. I can't zap the PowerPoint to make it move. Lessons learned. So yeah, so that is that was one example, and I want to go back briefly, actually, if I can. I can't, and that's fine. I don't need it. But there is. Oh, thanks. Thanks so much. Thanks for letting me know. There's another element here that I didn't really cover, and it was focal areas that's also in the crosswalk. That is something that, let me go back another one, maybe, yes, where that's the whole reason why the crosswalk is there. It's doing that, that mapping. The focal areas are being mapped to your goals. So that's kind of baked in when we approve your 5-year plan. So when you go into the SPR, you're indicating what goal your certain project is aligned to. That is automatically telling us what focal areas it is meeting. So I just wanted to kind of break down all the pieces of the crosswalk as much as I could. So shifting away from the crosswalk and just kind of talking about this transitionary period that we're in and how things can get a little bit weird. With equipment requests, I just wanted to remind everyone that be mindful of the grant year that your equipment will be funded out of. There will be a time where you have 2 open awards, one from a old 5-year plan and one from the new 5-year plan. And so in order for us to approve those equipment requests, they'll need to align with a goal that is related to that funding stream. So I hope that was clear. But you'll continue to use your goals from your 2018-2022 plan until you are spending your 2023 funds. So next up, the state profile pages. I'm going to only briefly cover this right now because tomorrow's communications presentation will go over the state profile pages. I just wanted to give you all a heads up that we'll put the new plans on your state profile page, and then in the fall, we'll work with all the program officers will work with our states to on the 5-year plan highlights for the state profile page. And again, tomorrow you'll see what that looks like more specifically. Dates and times, yay, more of those. And so again, as you look ahead, in September will be the deadline for accepting 5-year plans. That doesn't mean that they're active. That just means we've accepted them and you're going to be ready to go. And then in October is the federal fiscal year 2023, and that is when the 5-year plan period begins. But again, that will be contingent on you still will need the 2023 funds from us to start really using it in that way. And then in summer of 2024, you will change your goals in the SPR. And then in January of 2025, your first report for your 5-year plan will be due in the SPR, which seems like an eternity from now, but it's just with the new extended deadline, it's that first hunk of 2025. So as I mentioned, there's the cycle overlap here, and I wanted to just, again, give a visual snapshot. This is all available digitally to you. But you can see how most of you are familiar with the way the plans overlap. This just has an extra layer of showing you kind of where on the timeline we'll begin to activate your 2023 and 2027 goals in the SPR. And I just want to remind, a lot of you already know this, especially with the ARPA funds and things changing so much. Changing your goals, the only time it's considered a substantive change if it's the goal. If your projects change, if your objectives change, we love knowing that, and that's great, but it doesn't require official approval from us. And so the reason why I'm mentioning that is if it is a substantive change, it doesn't happen right away. So I have an example here, theoretically. Charlene Directorson, she once had a new goal to her current 5-year plan, and she sends a request to IMLS on June 23rd, 2023. IMLS accepts the request, but Ms. Directorson and her SLAA can't officially dedicate LSTA funds to further this new goal until October 1, 2024. So again, it will change based on when the request is made, but I just want to let you all know about how substantive goal changes work. So finally, as we usher you all into your break, we wanted to pick up on a tradition that we did 5 years ago, where we asked everybody here to take a little circle dot sticker over there, put your name of your state on it, and there's a little continuum that you can see reflected on this slide here, talking about whether your plan represents a total overhaul in the nature and the number of your goals, or whether it'll be virtually unchanged. And it's just really an interesting visual to see for us. So Terry is standing by. She's there to gesture and show us the area. And as I mentioned, just put your state initial on one of those stickers and plop them in where you see fit. And then once you're done with that, you can kick off our 15-minute afternoon break from 3 to 3:15.
Well, friends, we've been talking all day around these stimulus funds, and I'm really excited because we know how much work the reporting was for you, and we felt it was our duty and our charge to make sure that we turned something around from your great reporting data so that we'd have something to share with you about impact today. So I've been really looking forward to this session. And also because I'm co-presenting with one of my favorite colleagues at IMLS, Matt Birnbaum. Matt is the most veteran IMLSer in the room. He has walked alongside this community for longer than any of us in Grants to States, actually. He's helped us refine and develop our state program reports, so that is the well-oiled machine we know of it today. It had some clunky years there, and boy, Matt was right in the thick of it. But he has helped us think about evaluation and measurement and impact, and is constantly pushing us to think big and have grand visions about where we can take this program. And he's just an all-around great guy. So I'm going to let him start our presentation today, and you'll hear more from me soon.
So I think I want to run away after what Terry said, because I can't top that. 11 years ago, I was in Baltimore for the first time with all of you when we were actually starting to think about the state program report. Karen, Debbie, some others, Jamie, we were literally spent initial years, focus groups trying to think about it, and then training, empowering others to do it. And it was always a community, and that community was always within IMLS, a team with Terry's team. And just really grateful to have the honor. Y hola que nos veamos el año próximo y por años futuros. Y young and old, so thank you all for being here. The pandemic has kind of done a number on us, and it created some issues in terms of, as we were watching in Washington, D.C., we ourselves are being impacted. like all of you, we're suddenly not coming in the office, but we're trying to figure out what is happening in the libraries across the country. And we put the federal government puts money out to help as part of that emergency relief. And part of that money goes to IMLS, and a good share of that goes back out to the states and territories for emergency relief. And now as we think about those 2 years since, and trying to think about what happened, how did we try to help others during this emergency? That's what the conversation we'd like to have with you today about, is we can think about those that have been touched by the money in the libraries, maybe the kids who don't have the opportunities to be in the school and to be able to hit grade 4 and to be able to read. So they've had to look to libraries in other ways. Or maybe it's some of the adults who have, when we started the pandemic, we had very low inflation, low unemployment, and suddenly we're looking at a different trajectory. So what does that mean as we come out? How do we tell the story of the way that the federal dollars went to libraries for emergency relief? And how does that change? Terry, which one am I hitting? I did? Okay, great. So when we start, really what today's conversation is about is thinking about if we were to try to really drill deeper, maybe with some statistical analysis of the SBR data, maybe trying to do some interviews and trying to better understand the stories about how all the communities across the country that were touched by the CARES and ARPA dollars that each of the state SLAs used, what stories might we tell and who might be interested? What do each of you want to know from each other of how you use those money to help address others who have such emergency needs? What about our federal officials, Congress and White House, who are now going to be looking at inflation and looking and starting to think maybe about differently about how much federal taxpayer dollars to spend? What about some of the other audiences, the schools, others in our communities that rely on that partner with libraries? What are some of those stories that they might tell the press? So as we start thinking about should we try to evaluate and talk about the contributions that went with how the SLA spent their CARES and ARPA dollars, who are those audiences? The second piece that we want to think about is you just finished a 5-year evaluation and are wrapping up your 5-year plans. Those 5-year evaluations did not we gave you instructions, don't talk about your CARES dollars, don't talk about the ARPA dollars, but we know that those pandemic disrupted. So how do we, if we're going to now start talking about the spending that we did with CARES and ARPA dollars, how do we weave that with that rich stories and evidence-based stories you just told us for the 5-year evaluations? And then as we start looking for where's the data that can support the narrative, how much of it is coming from the SBR? How much is it from our other 5-year evaluations? What other public and gray documents are out there for us to take? Do we need to collect some new data? And how do we do it in a way that would be least burdensome for all of you, any of your stakeholders, and most rich? So today's roadmap, I'm going to turn it over to the smart one to my left. She and I have been around it for a decade. She somehow, in terms of time management efficiency, she's my idol. So she found time somehow in April, May, particularly May, to pull the records from CARES data and to start doing some of the types of thematic analysis that my team has historically done at this conference. She's going to show you those findings. She's going to give you some similar initial analyses from the ARPA funds. And then I'm going to come back with my big mouth and try to engage all of you in a story of coming back where we're starting from, which is if we were to do a deeper dive and evaluate to let others know and yourselves know about what the contributions of these investments that you made with the CARES and ARPA dollars, what should we be thinking about? So I'm going to turn it over to Terry. Thank you.
All right. So we're going to come back to these questions. We're going to give you a preview of them now so that you kind of can hold them in your head as you're looking at this data. We're going to whet your appetite with what we could do at this point in time with CARES and ARPA data. And you can think about what would you really like to see on top of this. So again, reiterating what Matt was saying, what kind of audiences, what kind of use and engagement do we need to be looking at as an agency in order to get to these stories? So hold this in your heads as we talk to you about CARES first. The other frame that I'd like to put in your heads is that this was our first foray into reporting stimulus funds, and at the outset we weren't sure what this was going to look like. We gave you what we think was a lot of flexibility in terms of reporting that for you in the way that it made the most sense. But as we've started to pull threads out of the state program report in terms of the storyline, these are things that I think we could amplify going forward when we look at it in the future for ARPA. So if you look at some of this data and think, oh, I could report on that differently so that IMLS can report on this differently for ARPA, that's kind of the second storyline that I'd like you to keep in your head as you look at this. So the first thing we can tell you is that you did a great job of identifying these projects as CARES Act projects. So we were able to see at a glance that there were 475 of them across the 59 states and territories. We still have a few states that had extensions and that have their projects in draft and completed status, so we acknowledge this is not like final baked data, but it's pretty close. And we also had 2 states that, because of the way that the proportion of LSTA funds was combined with CARES Act funds, they actually reported their CARES Act dollars under the banner of an LSTA project. So that's just a caveat to note at the outset as well. So some of the kind of easy analysis that we can do comes just right out of the SPR data pulls that we can do, and this is one of those graphs. So we can talk about budget categories. So perhaps not surprisingly to you, the large proportion of things or budgets that we saw around CARES dollars were in the supplies arena, and this was often things like the hotspots, the devices, if you bought personal protective equipment or sanitizing materials or learning kit stuff. That's the kind of supplies that we were seeing in the budgets. We were also seeing a large majority of funds going towards services. This probably isn't surprising either if you were buying digital content like databases or ebooks, if you were doing any internet upgrades or service plans or online reading programs, software, stuff like that. And then we had a smaller slice of money that you can see on the slide around salaries and equipment, which I think will become a really interesting storyline as we head into ARPA, because we've been spending our whole year answering equipment request approvals. And so we know those vehicles are out there and being purchased, and I think that slice of the pie for ARPA is going to get big. We can also look at what we call our focal areas for IMLS. There are 6 of them, so they're stacked here in these columns, and they're broken up by the 14 intents, which are kind of the subset of the focal areas. And what we saw for CARES was a large majority of funds being classified in our institutional capacity focal area, and in particular, library infrastructure. So we imagine this is things like the internet upgrades, the parking lot Wi-Fi, just making the library, maybe it's for the PPE and the sanitizing, making the library sort of safe and appropriate for visitors. We also had a large chunk of funds that came in under the information access, and actually this is by project, sorry I said funds, but this is the number of projects in each of these categories. So information access was another dominant area. And if we slice and dice this a slightly different way by the intents, you can see again that library physical and technology infrastructure kind of outpaced everything in terms of how this was being reported in the SPR. So we've got 12 of the 14 intents that came into play here. But is that really the story we want to tell? So what we did, instead of just relying on what the SPR can give us, is a little bit of a hand coding exercise where we looked at each and every project and teased out some of the themes that we thought might be important, like connectivity, like learning kits and PPE. The SPR doesn't have any fields for these areas. We have to sort of intellectually apply those ourselves, but we've done it. And of the 475 projects, you can see that connectivity is a great big proportion of those projects. And connectivity is a large bucket. We've got some subsets in there. One of them was internet upgrades. So if you were buying repeaters and extenders to amplify your Wi-Fi, that all went into that bucket of connectivity, but it is illustrated here by that light blue bar on the chart. Also in that category was the hotspots and the devices. And this, I think, is really interesting. We actually got a request at one point in the year for how many hotspots were funded with CARES Act funds. And at that point, we were like, well, we had some preliminary data. We thought maybe 4,000. But as we counted in the SPR, it almost doubled that number. And I think this is still a huge undercount because probably many of you nodding around the room know, like when you report your projects, you might not have told us how many hotspots or devices were purchased. So this, I think, is an opportunity as we head into the next reporting cycle for ARPA. If you do have this kind of data, wouldn't it be fun to tell IMLS so we can tell that national story? Think about it. Digital content, another large category. This again was the purchasing of databases, ebooks, things of that nature. And we put workforce as a subset of this because initially we'd heard from you as you were getting CARES Act funds that you might look at things around unemployment. In actuality, looking at the SPR reports, what we really saw around workforce was things like Learning Express, a database that covers things like resume building and acquiring new skills. And so almost all of the workforce projects we saw came under this digital content area. So it is a subset for most. There were some exceptions. PPE sanitizing, probably not surprising, is another large proportion here. And if I switch to the next slide, this was categorized by the number of projects, but the next slide recategorizes everything by the number of states. And so you'll see that PPE line kind of grows because a lot of states were doing it, but it was sort of recorded in a smaller number of projects. So maybe you just decided to record a single project for that in your state, which might explain the variance. But here again is a snapshot across all the 59 states, how many of you were doing any one of these things. And not surprisingly, connectivity was high. Things like reopening the libraries safely was high with the PPE sanitizing. So the good news is you were all doing what we asked you to do with the CARES Act funds, so thank you. We can also just kind of do a roll-up of reach, and this number kind of knocked me out. We didn't know how many museums were going to be reached, but we encouraged that. Well, what we counted in the SPR was 113 distinct museums. We counted 26 distinct tribes and 13,600 libraries of all types. So that is a huge reach. That means many of you were pushing that money out directly into communities, which was the intent of the act, that it would stimulate the economy. So thank you again for this incredible work on your part. And we see that that translated specifically into the way that you were disseminating it. 83% of the projects involve subawards. That is huge for our program. That is huge. And 39 of you did make subawards explicitly, and we counted over 3,000 of them in terms of what you reported. So I just want to highlight here, thinking again about how this is reported in the SPR and the kind of data points that we were just looking at. Nevada, Sulin, where are you? Sulin Jones. Sulin and I had worked earlier on a presentation for a senator in her state, and we put this slide together, but I think it really describes like those kind of impact numbers at a glance. And guess what? Sulin only gave us one CARES Act project. So she managed to get all this data squished into one single SPR project. It can be done. So good job, Sulin. But she told us, at a glance, we could see that they were reaching 17 libraries. How were they reaching them? They were using the IMLS suggested data points around unemployment and broadband need and SNAP data, so poverty data, and they were disseminating 449 hotspots. She gave us some great quotes. This was just one. During this pandemic, this has been a godsend. It has helped my kids with school and saved me money with my bill. I have like 20 of those quotes from Nevada, and they all make me want to cry. So thank you. Those are perfect. And you can see, like, we have just at a glance a whole bunch of impact. And so maybe the reporting, we know a lot of work went into this, but we don't want you to have to kill yourselves when ARPA comes around, because it's a great big amount of money, and it may not be that we need a great big amount of projects. So we leave it still to you. You have the flexibility to report how you want, but just food for thought. I'm going to turn now to ARPA data, which is a little different because it hasn't been reported yet. But one thing we did, both for CARES and ARPA, because again, we wanted to not increase your administrative burden to us by doing more reports, was we thought, how can we gather some preliminary data? And we know that many of you were issuing press releases about how the money was being used or how it was being awarded to different entities out in the field. So we use those, and that's where this data comes from. And also your initial plans in quotes, because it's not the 5-year plan, but it's an informal thing that you told us at the outset of ARPA that you thought you might do. So plans are in the light blue bars underneath, and the publicized work, which came from press releases, is in the dark blue bars. And it was pretty consistent. We counted this first in April when we disseminated ARPA. That was the light blue bars. And then in the end of the federal fiscal year, September 30th, that's when we kind of cut it off and said, all the press releases up to this date, we're going to put in this chart. So this was 5 months worth of work. This is an early snapshot of ARPA. But what we see is that far more of you actually were doing subawards than you initially planned or told us that you might do. And fewer of you were actually doing workforce development activities that we could see evidence of within those first 5 months. That doesn't mean we won't see more, but it's an interesting comparison study. And the others are pretty consistent. I will say physical resources, we heard little bits of in those plans, and then we were starting to see the vehicles and the mobile outreach things, the furniture, and all kinds of kind of big ticket purchase items that we weren't seeing as much with CARES, so we started to try to track that as well. By the numbers, ARPA, we thought was going to reach more people than CARES, theoretically, and in just 5 months, that kind of orange highlighted sentence near the bottom, we saw that you had reached at least 3,900 libraries, 37 museums, and 10 tribal entities with ARPA funds. We saw a whole bunch of you doing different kinds of competitive and formula-based subawards. We saw a whole bunch of you doing state-funded projects, and devices being purchased and sort of accounted for at the outset. So this is already a number that's rivaling what we saw for CARES. So I think this is going to be a big number if we get some numbers back in the SPR that we can report on. This chart compares those first 5 months of CARES with the first 5 months of ARPA. So CARES is in the gray on the underside of the lines, and the green bars on top are the ARPA funds. So what we're seeing from this, just as a high level, is that ARPA activity was surpassing CARES in basically every category, except the reach of museums and the reach of tribes, which we kind of, we walked back a little bit from how much we were pushing that during CARES, so that's not surprising. But the total number of libraries reached, you can see, is more than double. And the devices announced was also quite large. ARPA compared to CARES. So all this tells me is that what we're going to see in ARPA next year, or maybe a little ways long because we've got some extensions, but it's going to be impressive. So we're excited. This was just the anticipated institutional reach. And again, the number of institutions here is staggering and vastly outpaces what we've already seen for CARES. Next steps. This is where I'm going to bring Matt back up to facilitate our visioning.
Thanks, Terry. And I don't want to talk too much. I want to open a dialogue with all of you. And so the question I want to ask is as you think about the last several years of living during a pandemic and the work you had to do to help libraries across your states and territories help those in their community in need, is the data that we're sharing with you, is it enough? Is there any other stories you'd like to tell? And we're really just going to have a conversation. If you could wave your magic wand, what stories are you interested in learning about? And, I'm going to probably call on some veterans who I know just to get the conversation going and make them feel a little awkward. Hey, Jamie, you want to start?
Well, just looking at this and thinking about what we've gone through, I guess I'd like to know more about, more specifics about workforce development, what we've done in libraries to help people get jobs or quit their jobs or something, because that's just been a phenomenon.
Thanks, Jamie. Anyone want to add to it about workforce? Anything of interest? Do you think your policymakers, any audiences be interested in that story? Any opportunities for your agency to maneuver over the next 5 years? Please.
Yeah, the workforce information would be helpful because it would align with our state's governor's priorities as well. So being able to demonstrate that we're supporting that directly would be helpful.
Thank you.
Kind of related to that, we had a lot of we knew that the funding went to libraries when they were the only really service game in town.
Yeah.
That even city and town services disappeared. Generally, the libraries were active early in 2020 and never shut down. And so that's a bit of it, that kind of the importance in getting away from libraries as entertainment, cultural, and more community and economic impact.
Thank you.
So in the smaller states that maybe do only statewide programs, a lot of our workforce stuff gets buried because of how the reporting structure is. And so I think for ARPA, maybe diving deeper into what's not told in the SPR because of how it is reported, so you guys can report. Because I know that's always a little frustrating for us when you're reporting on a statewide program and the workforce is down a couple of steps, but overall it's in like an information access. So that would just be a suggestion to dive deeper and get that story for some of the statewide projects.
Thank you.
I just wanted to build off of Rob as well, like just the sheer volume of work that we and our libraries were doing. I would love to be able to highlight that and say like we actually quadrupled the number of grants we offered in Utah. And I can tell that story, but I think it's an interesting, helpful thing nationally to say like, this is, your library community showed up and they really did work, basically.
In New Hampshire, we do statewide projects. We don't do subgrants normally with LSTA funds. So using the ARPA money, and we've done 2 subgrant rounds, having those specific stories, and one of the things that I did with the final reporting I asked the subawardees to do is include photos. Now y'all probably know about 75% of those photos are garbage, but the other 25% is not. And illustrating those kinds of stories and allowing us to use that in a visually appealing way, both on a website or in handouts to our congressional staff, and then being able to give that to you, I feel having those specific references really hits home on the emotional level, which is what we need to do to really make that impact of how libraries in their communities addressed community needs
appropriately and efficiently and really can help bring our status up for future funding, and especially in New Hampshire on the state level, because there is no state funding for libraries.
Thank you.
I don't know how you all would get at this, but it would be really interesting to also see how this funding sparked collaboration with other entities in the state. I know that we were able to fund so many Wi-Fi projects that then fit into a statewide initiative to get those Wi-Fi, the Wi-Fi availability onto a statewide map. And we worked with other agencies around the state to highlight that. And those are stories, it wouldn't have been possible without this money. And I don't know how you would capture that, but it would be interesting to see what that sparked in terms of collaborations.
I think that's great. I would really love to hear other stories about any lessons or experiences of doing collaboration and what that looks like.
This is Debbie, and I think to piggyback on New Hampshire about, who get the information to, I know we had several small community libraries that their county judge, mayor wanted to close the library at the beginning of the pandemic because they weren't open and they weren't doing anything, whereas they were doing curbside service, they were doing virtual programming, and as they got the ARPA funds, so they did outdoor areas so they could social distance and do outdoor programming. And I think that's what's needed, is that they kept those libraries open because they realized they were serving, the public and doing a good job. So I think that's something that we need to look at to see how the mayors, how the county judges and stuff like that, if it changed their perception of the public library.
Thanks, Debbie.
I'm going to talk on behalf of Ohio, actually. I'm going to steal some thunder from the former boss over there. We had a lot of libraries use funds to buy vehicles. And before I left, we had talked about having a touch-a-truck event with those vehicles during a board meeting. So the board could come and see all the vehicles that the libraries had purchased and then send that out so people could post it on their website, send it out as press releases. We have run into libraries struggling with marketing, and because we're not marketers. We're librarians at best. There's a lot of non-librarians in those roles in Ohio. But that was just one of the ways we thought it's such a great visual statement to see all those bookmobiles and trucks out in the world. So, Evan, I'm just stealing your thunder once again.
Thanks, Cindy. Does anyone have any stories or thoughts about how libraries, SLAs and libraries are able to pivot during this time and help families with school-aged children? I mean, any thoughts to share?
Good afternoon. In the Virgin Islands, we were able to go virtual, and we're not the most tech savvy of states or territory, and I think that surprised everybody. I know I was able to get Congresswoman Plaskett involved, our governor, our first lady, and we were able to partner with the Department of Education because they were all virtual, so we were able to supplement what they were doing and really engage children and doing some events in person, like we'd bring our bookmobile and engage a small number of people, library patrons and whatnot, in person, but then to do virtual events too. We've been able to really bridge that digital divide that we haven't been able to do. So that's been really exciting for us.
Thank you.
This is probably not unique to Vermont, but by being able to expand Wi-Fi access, our libraries bought picnic tables and outdoor charging stations and all sorts of things so that families could come and hop on the Wi-Fi and do school from the parking lot. Sadly enough, we were also able to use the first CARES Act money and then ARPA money to offer streaming movies in public schools. And that really helped virtual education to be able to assign movies to be part of the curriculum to students to watch at home, and then come back and talk about those movies, and that really helped the school libraries and the teachers.
We have one person here, then also want to hear from anyone virtually, if we can hear those voices too in this conversation. Please.
We have a sub-project with our science center, and it was a in-person exhibit, and of course, you know, we couldn't continue that. So they switched it around and created kits, STEAM kits that could be checked out to families from the public libraries, and they could go and do science experiments and things like that at home.
Thank you.
Yeah, we have one more comment. One way that ARPA dollars were used in Minnesota was for like cultural legacy. So ARPA dollars were used because we can't, like the monk community couldn't have funerals or community events during COVID, and so they used their libraries and virtual programming that we helped to provide through the IMLS ARPA dollars to like keep those cultures intact, to have elders communicate with children in different ways, because they couldn't do those usual activities that are. Also in the Somali, there was a program for in the Somali culture and Karen as well that again used those dollars to kind of change the way they passed on.
Thank you. Do we have anyone chatting that has made any comments?
You know we do. There's been an uptick in telehealth, digital access. It's increased working with state partners. Some folks have increased or started offering subawards, and workforce-related subscriptions.
Let's start with that first theme of telehealth, health. Pandemic really changed a lot of our lives. We've been living with this fear, this uncertainty. People come to the libraries for information. Any stories to share about that?
Well, it's not quite a story yet because we're just getting these pods, these two-person pods using ARPA funds distributed to 10 or 11 libraries around the states for different types of teleservices. Could be telehealth is what we're mainly promoting, but it could be to do depositions or whatever you need to do virtually. So.
Thanks, Jamie.
Just to add on to the telehealth, we have a beta test to see how it works in rural areas and did a lot of analysis of, you know, how far away healthcare and specialists were in Maine. And the press release just opened the floodgates of people who were super interested in partnering. And so I'm really encouraged that there'll be more funding from other people within the state of Maine to further along our telehealth, and also through the Digital Equity Act funding. They're really interested, the organization, in that. And so it was just very interesting how it really popped for partnerships from other folks.
You know, another audience is you yourselves thinking about this pandemic happening. We knew anecdotally some of you initially were reassigned to other agencies, some of you were maybe having a little pause, but a lot of you were just working big time. And suddenly, in addition to the FY20 grants, you now have CARES Act and FY21 and ARPA. What's it been like for all of you to try to manage your job and do your job the best during this emergency? What are some of the stories that we may not know well enough? Someone's off and share. What's the joke?
So in my job, I feel like I have three, because my title is Assistant State Librarian, but I do LSTA Coordinator. I deal with all the contracts and the procurement and RFPs for the State Library, and I do library development. And I feel like during this period that the managing of almost 3 times the money that we normally get on top of the library development issues that astronomically, and the neediness of our public library workforce was just overwhelming. And managing that has been one of the most challenging things. And for me personally, I have had to sort of reevaluate how I approach my work and be much more intentional and deliberate about where I spend my time and where I put my focus in order to serve those communities in the best way and not get sidetracked by people who, how do I say this nicely, really want you to hold their hand all the time and hold the tissues while they cry. You know what? People get to work. So, you know, we have money to give you. Let us give it to you and then do the work. So anyways, that's just my personal perspective.
Thank you. We've got a couple of others.
We were able to do a pretty good process evaluation internally to figure out how we can handle it and digitize our whole contract process and do everything electronically. And so it became a real, you know, even though we're in the throes of the end of the fiscal year right now, it became a real opportunity to evaluate what we were doing and make sure we weren't stuck in any ruts or in any ways of doing things that were going to make it more difficult for our subgrantees.
Thought we had
So
another hand.
hurrah for internal evaluation.
Okay, I admit I was one of the people who laughed when you asked how we were doing. So as I said before, I'm the SDC for our state, and we added 30-some data elements, and we already do subgrants for Indiana, and we did about 450 CARES mini grants in addition to that, and then 150 ARPA, and those were my projects. And I think, and there was one person in the business office who I suspect heard abruptly quitting had to do with this. And I think there are a lot of stories about people suddenly seeing staff members decide now is a great time to retire or relocate, which is hard for those left behind. But I think for me, the biggest difficulty was letting go, and I mentioned this when we were talking about like our 5-year plans and our evaluations. There's a sense for me that there was some lost opportunity because there's just too much happening. Going into this year, I had some excitement about like we can really sit down and tear into the details of the PLS or tear into the details of our 5-year plan and you know, do focus groups and evaluations and it ended up being like, oh, please, dear God, just turn something in. I mean, but, you know, and that's not to say that we're just over there like, we don't care. We care very much. But there is only so many hours in the day, and there's only so many, you know, there's only so much that this very limited and rapidly shrinking staff can take on. So just the timing to have all of these things on top of each other, and saying, well, we have all the good intentions in the world, and it just, the way it all crashed together means that you really had to pick and choose what to focus on and be okay with letting the rest go and saying, you know, this is going to work for the next cycle, and maybe in 5 years we'll be able to sit down and really tear it apart at the level I had hoped to, and I think a lot of us had hoped to.
I'm going to piggyback on Angela from the virtual world. We've got some folks talking about the fact that ARPA and CARES really felt like a second job on top of what they were already doing, whether you were already providing subgrants or not. I know I've talked, when I was in the role before, I remember specifically talking to my friend Catherine Prince and saying that this role can often feel like super siloed, and that we're unicorns, there's only one of us per state, and it can be really tough, and a lot of us are one-person shops or two-person shops, and the grant monies were fantastic. We did a lot of wonderful things with them, but it was hard. And, you know, let's just acknowledge that. It was tough, folks. It was tough.
Yeah, I also found the influx of new money awesome and wonderful for the state of Maryland.
But as a person who, I'm a very introverted, surprisingly and shockingly, I know for a librarian. And I used to think about my job all the time when I wasn't at my job. But what I had to do during the pandemic was separate my work life from my personal life. The two had become intertwined. You know, I was working from home for some of the pandemic, and what I have done is compartmentalize my work life and my personal life. So when I am not at work, I do not think about my job. And I'm doing this as a form of self-care because I have to.
There's also, so I'm obviously overwhelmed and overworked, and I now have a team of 3 doing what I used to do with 75% of my time. But I'm noticing a huge trickle down in my sub-grantees as well, just like serious grant fatigue and feeling really overwhelmed. And even when we're handling the bulk of the project, they are just out of steam. And so it's been a really great blessing to have all this money, but it's been really hard to like goad and encourage and drag all of this out of them. So I do think it's kind of trickled down from the state library into our grantees as well.
Yeah, thank you.
This is Debbie again. As a state that has never, ever done subawards from the beginning of LSTA, I would like to give a big thank you to those states who do subaward for your information you have on your website, because I borrowed heavily from all these states. So I just want to say thank you very much.
Please.
So just as a positive note, you know, as a state library in North Carolina, we never stopped doing what we always did. We've heard from libraries that without our CE program and the virtual offerings that they had, that they would have had to lay off staff. They were able to show that people were able to continue with their professional development and able to work at home if the library was closed. So just the work that we do is amazing, and that we were able to continue doing it is just, yeah, y'all know.
So just about subawards, we've never did subawards, so we did subaward formula grants. Wow. And what I realized was that the capacity that we would need to actually do subawards, plus how much more money we would need to do subawards, that, you know, I know that in Maine, you know, without unbelievable change, that's not the way for us to go, just from a staff capacity and also, you know, the money capacity, that the statewide funding goes much further in reaching all. You know, I think our libraries would love to get subgrants every single year, but, you know, that would need such an unbelievable increase of funds. I don't think it's realistic, but yeah, great thanks to all the states that recommended grant management software, because we couldn't have done it without that. So.
I'd like to just continue this conversation, but on a different question for you. And not saying we are, but let's say right now we're going to assume that in addition to the analysis that Terry just shared, we're going to try to drill a little bit more deeper and do an evaluation and talk about what the experience and results were like for those of you who are administering these CARES Act and ARPA funds, doing your best to help the communities. So the questions for you now is, how would you want to be involved with us as we were doing that evaluation? Would any of you want to work with us closely as subject matter experts as we really try to put together the method and think about the process and all those other issues? Like a community of practice, how would you want to be, if you don't want to be that close, how would you want us to keep in touch with you and communicate with it? Would it suffice to keep you out of the loop and at the end we share with you the final findings, maybe, let's say, 18 months, 24 months from now, or would you want some communications in the interim So if you can help us think about that, because that goes into our strategy as we start thinking about putting a proposal together.
I think one of the things that might be helpful is for those of us states that didn't have a sub-grant program before, it would be really useful to drill down with them how they pulled it off. And I speak from New Hampshire. We don't have a regular sub-award program. We do statewide projects, and I know there's a handful at least of us. And having to implement that so quickly, I mean, we got the award notification for ARPA in April. We put out our first sub-grant award application in May. And that, I mean, let's just say for a good year, I didn't take a vacation. So I'm taking a vacation in August and I'm not working, just saying. So, and I'm not checking email either. But I think that would be really useful in guiding in the future any other LSDA coordinators in states where they either stop doing subawards or pull back, or they want to implement one. There's some best practices to be learned there that could help even those who already do subgrants.
Thank you. Please.
I would love involvement, and I think one of the things that we're very cautious of is, at least in Massachusetts, like 98% of library funding is done locally. So these federal funds help, state funds help, but it's not the picture. So just to tease the panel presentation, if you can stick around. But part of what we tell the story of is on that local level, because we know that's where they get most of their money. Yep. So that's a story that has a little bit of different language and a little bit different nuance to it that I would love to kind of be able to use any results you had in that conversation.
Yeah, it's on target. Thank you. Hey, I'm going to put IMLS staff on notice. You've been listening to the conversation. Any impressions you want to share? Questions, comments? Madison, Dennis, Laura, Cindy?
Sure.
Go ahead, Matt.
I've been really heartened by everyone's ability to be forthcoming about their thoughts and their experiences here today, and what you've gone through the past 2+ years. And I would love to work on some kind of evaluation to demonstrate the value of you as LSTA coordinators, and to harken back to a previous conference theme, superheroes.
Definitely.
That we've witnessed, because it is a very niche position to be in, and I know one of my personal frustrations is explaining what I do and who I work with to others.
Yes.
And pointing to these past 2 years has been, I've gotten my non-librarian friends to really understand the value of libraries and even know what a state library is now. So appreciation is outflowing from me.
Yeah. Me too. And yeah, I agree, Madison. Everybody thinks I work at the Library of Congress, which is fine. It's just easier. but I think one of the first things top of mind was what Lori brought up, was the kind of tracking the change and what had to occur for a non-subgranting state library to start subgranting. I guess I'm loath to put forth what should be gathered, not without really knowing or having, the reality at the state level of what can be done. But if I had kind of my druthers, I would love for some sort of assessment beyond the data to talk about, similar to what Lori mentioned, the before and after. Not just subgranting or non, but the partnerships that Matt was talking about before. Are they now sustained in ways they haven't been before? Moving forward, are there things that are going to be coming out of all of these funds that will outlast the funds? That's super interesting, and I'm interested because I feel instinctually that it's there, and so that's why I'd be curious to have that on paper, but also to this is really probably pie in the sky from an official report evaluation standpoint, but to recognize in very concrete terms what was all described here, that like the hardships and how difficult it was to pull it off in the event that there is another similar, emergency stimulus funding thing. Like what could be done better to make that easier to put off on the human element at the state and local level.
Thanks, Dennis. I can speak more effectively from your perspective. Having just left your role, I can say, as tough as it was, gosh, we learned a lot. Didn't we? I mean, I did. And I'm so grateful that we had a try run through CARES before we got all that ARPA money, because I was really happy to just try it with, the small dollar amount that was CARES before we had to deal with that gigantic dollar amount. We learned a heck of a lot about breaking down as many barriers as possible to get as many people as many institutions as possible to apply for a grant, and we applied that to ARPA, and Madison was instrumental in helping us to do that. Oh, you were. And we built so many bridges with our IT department in order to get that done. I don't know if it would have taken years and different projects altogether. They're great, but it just wouldn't have occurred. Matt Ector would like to say something before we finish this up. No, that's fine.
Get to practice Spanish again.
In Puerto Rico, most teacher librarians gave virtual reference. In the municipality of Culebra is an island. Teacher librarian was working for the first 3 months of the pandemic from 6 a.m. To 6 p.m. He asked him if his students were already connected in Microsoft Teams. He told me that 100% of his students were connected, she said. In another public library in municipality of Comerío, he was working on card service or line up to receive information service, print, information, whatever. Teacher librarian work in Puerto Rico because educational advisor. Thank you.
Thank you. So we're going to take this information that you have. Before I go further, I want to personally thank Madison, Emily, and Talitha, who've been here virtually. They've been so proud of them to have the opportunity to work with them as part of my members of the team, and Terry, for you and your team giving us a chance to work with all of you. During the conference, we're not going to probably be here tomorrow, but during the conference, please talk to Terry and the team of any of the ideas that we're percolating now. Don't hesitate. You all know how to hopefully reach us by email. We're going to be here. We're going to take, during this hour together, Madison and Emily, who's been online, they've been taking notes. I've been watching Terry taking notes. I'm sure some others. We're going to take all the information that you have, and we're going to do our homework this summer. And we're going to start, our teams meet regularly, we meet closely. And we're going to really try to start reflecting on what you told us and to start putting together some thoughts of if we were to evaluate what it might look like. And we'll do the briefings with leadership in the summer so that as the summer comes to an end, we're ready to come back to you in the States. We'll talk with COSLA. We'll make sure that all of you we're communicating with all of you as well, so that by the time we get to late fall, early winter, we'll have the options for leadership, and we'll have a recommendation. Should we go with the evaluation, and if so, what will it look like? and then we'll go forward and implement it. So if you have any thoughts about that, that's our timeline. We're going to be transparent and respectful as we can. And we're just grateful you gave us this opportunity to talk with all of you about it. So again, if you need to follow up, you've got our names, you got our addresses, you got our numbers. Don't hesitate. Thank you. And Terry.
Thank you, Matt. And I think the heart of Matt's question early on about like, how do you want to be involved? Like, we want to do right by you, right? We hear how burdened you've been. So we don't want to overburden you with this, but we also want to keep you in the loop. So finding that tension, I think, is the thing we're looking for now. So if you have thoughts on that, we're all ears. Matt is a wonderful resource. I think it's obvious from this presentation, but I mean, he is committed to this program and making sure that your stories get out to the people who need to hear them. So let's thank him one more time. Oh, it's horrible. I also want to give a shout out to Cindy and Laura, who've been in solidarity with our virtual people all day long. We are heading into the home stretch here. So I'm going to do just a few, we've got like announcements, but then the good stuff, which is a little more recognition. So after this session, a reminder that we're going to have the program officer office hours starting, and we've got a reference sheet about who's going where, when on the registration desk. There's still a few open slots if you want to sign up, particularly for tomorrow. We did have a switch in the room, so just to let you know, Dennis's room is fancy. It's through the restaurant called Water Table that you've probably seen a few times, but you've got to go through the restaurant, and in the back of the restaurant there's a weird little boardroom with a great view. So that's where Dennis is going to be. Water Table. Madison, meanwhile, is going to be in the Federal Hill room, which is almost straight back from where we are. There's a sign there. It's near that coat check area. So hopefully you can find Madison and Federal Hill. And Cindy and I are going to be here somewhere. We don't know where yet, somewhere. So office hours this afternoon and tomorrow morning. If you sign up for dine-arounds, and I don't know how much traction we got over here, but you might want to meet as we close down and just make sure that you know who you're going to dinner with and when makes sense for you and where you want to meet. So reconvene over here. I think we're going to repurpose this tomorrow, it sounded like, for when you're leaving. So where do you need to be? If you want to share a ride with someone, we're going to sort of get a little crowdsource thing going on over here. And I will add my name to it because I can take a contingent to DC with me on the train if you're interested. So we can do that. If you have any parking lot questions, I see one or two over there. That's great. And the appreciation wall is going strong. We're going to revisit that tomorrow. And a reminder about the 5-year plan continuum back in that corner. You can fill that out at any time, but we're going to kind of pull them and bring them up at the end of the day tomorrow. So make sure you get your information in. And be thinking on your burning question or two for tomorrow. And tomorrow, consider sitting with new and different people. I challenge you to not sit in the same place. We'll see if that happens. I'm not keeping track, but you know. So, I think now, barring any other announcements, am I forgetting anything? Okay, we're going to go to the most newsworthy moment of the day. It is the part we relish. We celebrate you every year if we can, based on different achievements, some of which are a very mundane part of the program, but they're very important to us. So we've created awards around them. And since this year is hybrid, we're going to have several of our award recipients who are not here with us in the room. But for those of you who are, we'd like you to come up and get group pictures here just briefly. In your groups, we have different categories of awards, so we'd like those category folks to be together for a picture. And Cindy and Laura were going to give maybe some prompts to the people who are virtual as an adaptation of that. And I want to thank Dennis Nangle in particular for spearheading so much of this. He's like the creativity engine on the Grants to States team. And I also want to disclaim that no federal funds were used for these prizes. None. So we're trying to be good role models in that. As you know, our theme is news this year. There is a very well-known award in the news community known as the Pulitzer. We've adapted it for this community, which should be intimately familiar with the State Program Report, or SPR. Years ago, we had a SPUR award because we put the U in the SPR. You are what make the SPR great. And so this year, we have the Spurlitzer. Very similar, groan-worthy, just as august as the Pulitzer. It's just as great. And it's a medal, so we found little chocolate versions of this that we're going to hand out, little chocolate Spurlitzers that you'll get with your certificates. But the first category you can see on the screen, the Hot Off the Presses Award for being a star state programs reporter and being one of the first to submit their 2020 report. For most states, these were due at the end of December, unless you had an extension, but some of these reports come in well before then, and we keep track. So we're going to give awards in each of the program officer portfolios, so I'll call up my fellow program officers, and I'm going to handle the Cindy Terry awards here. So we're going to have award recipients from each of the portfolios. So the first recipient from the Terry Cindy portfolio is, did I get this right? Here we go. Kansas, the State Library of Kansas. Come on up. And from Dennis's portfolio, Idaho, who I think is virtual. And Madison's portfolio, Arizona. So come on up. Oh. And you're going to stay for a picture, aren't you? Hold on. Very creative. Creative stuff going on here. It's the journalism in action is what's happening right here. All right. Congrats to our hot off the presses state program reporters. The next award category we have is the This Just In Award. This is for being an expert coordinator of signatories to be one of the first to turn in the signed assurances and certifications. So these, as a reminder, when you get your grant award from us, we say, and we've got this thing you have to sign and return to us in 10 days. But sometimes we get them back in mere hours, and we had so many folks in this category that we gave 3 for each of the portfolios. So from the Terry Cindy portfolio, we've got Wyoming, we've got Oregon, who I think is virtual, and we've got Utah. From the Dennis portfolio, we have Arkansas, and Alabama. Oh yeah, there's going to be 9 folks up here, so you're just going to have to wait a while, just one moment. Maybe less than 9. We have a few virtual. I think Alabama might have gone virtual. Poor Keln. Okay. New Jersey. And from Madison's portfolio, we've got a virtual Hawaii, a virtual Connecticut, and North Carolina. So now we can take a picture. It's a shout out for DocuSign. DocuSign for the win. All right, next we have a category we're calling the Extra Extra Award for smashing the deadline and getting the 2023-2027 five-year plan submitted early to be reviled by all your peers who have not yet submitted their plans. But we love you, so we're giving you awards. So from the Madison portfolio, we've got Library of Michigan. And from the Dennis portfolio, Tennessee. And from the Cindy Terry portfolio, repeat in Wyoming. Incidentally, we did not give awards for the five-year evaluations because we figured there was so much happening with your third-party evaluators that would be a strange award category. But so many of you did a great job turning these in. Thank you. We have a fun new category for our entire program this year, the People's Choice, the People's Sperlitzer. So we had one nomination. It was wonderful. One nomination from the wonderful Kathleen Moeller-Pfeiffer. So shout out to her for nominating. And I think both Kathleen and her nominee should come up. So we'll get a picture of both of you. Kathleen nominated Janet McKinney for the following reason. Come. Janet, she is always an active and informative participant in virtual LSTA meetings as well as in-person conferences. She also participates in providing answers to LSTA coordinator questions on our listserv. Janet makes everyone feel welcome, and there is never such thing as a dumb question to her. Janet has been Maine's LSTA coordinator and head of library development since 2006, and since she'll be retiring this July, I would like to see her receive recognition for her contributions to the LSTA community. And incidentally, if you didn't know, Kathleen is also technically retired. So we're losing both of these wonderful people.
Yes. And I can say the same thing about Kathleen. Everything
Congrats. Congrats. We'll miss you. But we did look inside ourselves at IMLS and came up with another category of People's Choice. Nothing you knew we would be interested in. But in fact, this thing saves Laura McKenzie literally hours of time. Did you know that she makes all your five-year evaluations 508 compliant? And if you can imagine, this is like alt tags and text on images and charts. And some of these documents are hundreds of pages long and have dozens and dozens of charts. So she'll spend like weeks on this activity. But she was spontaneously overjoyed when 2 states submitted five-year evaluations that were already 508 compliant. So they're getting awards today. So let's call up Minnesota State Library and New York State Library. Wow. People's Choice. All right, no picture? All right, picture, yeah. Yay. All right, that ends the formal paper certificates. However, we thought so much about other potential award categories because you guys have done so much over the last few years, extraordinary amounts of work. But instead of more paper, we're just going to call it out, and we'd love that if you fall into any of these categories, just stand, and we're going to applaud you. And if you are virtual, like shout yourselves out, and we are acknowledging you too. Some of you made it through the entire pandemic, 2 rounds of stimulus funds, a 5-year evaluation, and a 5-year plan in this state library environment. So if this was you, please stand. Who made it through the whole thing? Wow. Congrats, you're all getting Sperlitzers in their chocolate form. Some of you were onboarded into the program in the midst of the pandemic and stimulus funds and 5-year activities. So if this was you, please stand. That was not an easy thing. Yes. And you're still with us. Wow. Many of you launched, this came up just now, many of you launched or relaunched sub-granting programs for stimulus funds for the first time. If this was you, please stand. Wow, we've got, for the virtual folks, I just want to acknowledge, we have one table that stood up. Everyone at the table stood up, and there was no one else. Very interesting. Birds of a feather, I guess. Many of you, and this is not a standing thing, but just acknowledging, many of you respond regularly to the listserv and attend the bi-monthly Zoom calls and are so incredibly helpful to each other. This community is amazing in that way. And all of you have been stewards of federal funds in the most dynamic moment in this program's history, which is this moment. All of you have been amazing. You are truly a special group of people, and so we want to recognize all of you. So give yourselves a hand. We're going to wrap up now. I believe we're early, so bonus. We're going to get everybody in the room some chocolates. And so we appreciate all of you. For those of you online, thank you for hanging in there with us. We are doing our best, and we appreciate you. And we will see some of you at program officer office hours. And for the rest of you, we will see you tomorrow at 9 a.m.